The report that went out to Sol Command was 4 words long. Confirmed. No intelligent life. Dr. Elena Vasquez had written those words herself 6 months before the colony ship, Meridian's Hope, even left dry dock. She'd spent 11 days in orbit around the planet they were now calling Aster 7, running every scan the survey drone carried. No radio noise, no agricultural grid patterns, no cities, no roads, no fires burning in patterns too regular to be lightning strikes. Just forests the color of rust, oceans the color of old bronze, and silence on every frequency humans knew how to listen on. Ghost planet, the survey pilot had joked. Nobody home. Elena hadn't laughed. She'd learned over 3 tours doing first contact protocol work that no signal and no one were not the same sentence. But the board back home wanted colonies, and Aster 7 had breathable air, a 23-hour day, and soil that grew Terran wheat on the first try. 4 words were enough to greenlight 40,000 settlers. Now, 8 months into the colony, Elena stood at the edge of Outpost Meridian's northern fence line, watching the tree line the way she always did at dusk. Habit. The forests here didn't make noise the way Earth's did. No bird song, no insects, nothing but wind moving through leaves shaped like open hands. It should have been peaceful. It never felt peaceful. It felt like the woods were listening back. Part 1. The wrong kind of quiet. Outpost Meridian was not a fortress. Nobody had built it to be one, because nobody thought they needed one. It was a grid of prefab domes, a solar array the size of 6 football fields, hydroponics bays, a school for the 11 children born since departure, and a perimeter fence rated for wild animals, not war. That was the first mistake, not malicious, not even careless, really. Just the ordinary human mistake of believing the last report you read. Marcus Webb, the outpost's head of security, had made his own peace with the quiet in a different way, by not trusting it at all. He ran patrols nobody had asked for. He doubled the motion sensors along the fence within his first month, paid for out of his own equipment allowance, because the requisition committee said the budget was for agriculture, not hypothetical threats. There's no such thing as an empty forest, he told his teenage daughter, Sarah, more than once. There's only a forest that hasn't shown you what's in it yet. Sarah rolled her eyes at that, the way 16-year-olds roll their eyes at fathers who've clearly read too many old field manuals. She had grown up on this planet's stories more than Earth's. The settlers' second generation always did. To her, Aster 7's silence wasn't ominous. It was simply home. She spent her afternoons past the fence line more often than her father knew, cataloging the rust-colored trees for a school botany project, half in love with a world that had never once tried to hurt her. That changed on a Tuesday in the 8th month, in the space of about 4 minutes. She was kneeling by a cluster of the hand-leaf trees, sketching root patterns, when the ground under her palm vibrated. Not an earthquake, something rhythmic, something with intent. She looked up in time to see the brush across the small clearing part on its own, no wind behind it. What stepped out was not an animal. It stood on 2 legs, roughly Sarah's height, its skin the mottled bronze green of the forest canopy it had just walked out of. Not camouflage by accident, but the unmistakable, engineered precision of camouflage by design. It wore something. That was the detail that froze her in place longer than the shock of seeing it at all. Not clothing exactly, a woven harness across its narrow chest, holding tools with handles, tools that had clearly been made, not found. Its eyes were the last thing to register, because they were the most human thing about it. Wide, dark, and afraid. Just as afraid as she was. For 3 full seconds, a 16-year-old girl from Nebraska that used to be, and a creature Earth's finest survey equipment had sworn did not exist, stood 10 feet apart in a silent forest, each waiting to see if the other one screamed first. Sarah ran. So did it, in the opposite direction, faster than anything with legs that shape had any right to move. She didn't stop running until she hit the fence line, and by the time security dragged the story out of her, she was crying too hard to get the details straight. But she got one thing across clearly enough that Marcus Webb's blood went cold. It had a bag, Dad. It had tools. It wasn't an animal. Part 2. 4 words. Rewritten. The Outpost Council did what outposts always do when a teenager reports something impossible. They didn't believe her. Not out of cruelty. Out of the very human need to keep believing the 4 words that had let them sleep at night for 8 months. Wildlife mimicry, said Dr. Osi, the colony's chief biologist, in the emergency meeting that night. Aster 7's ecosystem has already shown us 3 species that use tool-like structures instinctively. The burrow wasps build with mud in geometric patterns that look deliberate. Convergent behavior isn't intelligence. She said it had eyes like it was scared, Marcus said. Animals don't get scared of specific things, Ose. They get scared of predators. That thing looked at my daughter like it recognized what she was. With respect, Marcus, that's a father's read on a traumatized teenager's account, not data. It was Elena Vasquez, silent until then at the end of the table, who ended the argument. She'd run first contact protocols on 2 other worlds before Aster 7, and she recognized the specific shape of institutional denial when she heard it, because she'd built parts of it herself with 4 words in a report 6 months before launch. I was wrong, she said simply. Or the drone was. Either way, we send a team out at first light, and we send them with a translator kit, not a rifle. If there's a chance my report is why 40,000 people are about to have their first contact incident with no protocol in place, I owe it to fix that before it becomes a body count instead of a conversation. Marcus didn't like it, but he liked the alternative, pretending it hadn't happened until it happened again. Worse, even less. Part 3. What the forest had been hiding. They found the first structure 4 kilometers past the fence line, in a ravine the original survey drones had scanned as dense canopy. No anomalies. It wasn't dense canopy. It was a roof, woven from living branches, grown and shaped over what had to be years rather than built in a season. The structure sat low against the ravine wall, indistinguishable from the surrounding forest from above. Not by luck, but by a design philosophy that had clearly prioritized not being seen from the sky above almost everything else. That detail was the one that made Elena's hands go cold as she stood in the doorway. An ecosystem doesn't evolve architecture that specifically defeats orbital surveillance. A culture that has been hurt by something from orbit before does. The village, because that was unmistakably what it was, once you knew to look, held perhaps 200 of the creatures Sarah had described. Though creature stopped fitting the word within about 10 seconds of walking among them. They had names, spoken in clicks and low tones Elena's translator struggled with. They had children who hid behind adults exactly the way human children did. They had elders, marked by lighter skin patterning, who did not hide and who did not run, and who watched the human survey team walk into their home with an expression Elena had seen before, on the faces of people who had survived something and were bracing to survive it again. It was one of these elders, designated, eventually, by a click pattern the humans rendered phonetically as Vect, who stepped forward when the humans stopped and didn't advance further. The translator kit needed 11 minutes of vocabulary exchange, gesture, and patient repetition before it produced its first full sentence. When it did, the room of human researchers went silent enough to hear their own recorders humming. "You are the sky people who came back," the translation read. "Last time, you took our children." Elena's stomach dropped through the ravine floor. "We just arrived," she said carefully through the translator. 8 months ago. This is our first time on this world." Vec's response, once translated, made Marcus Webb reach for the sidearm he'd promised the council he wouldn't bring, before Elena's raised hand stopped him. "Not you," the translation read. "Sky people before you. Many turns of the seasons ago, they came from the black, and they took the young, and they did not speak, and they did not ask. And when we fought them, they burned 3 villages from above to teach the rest of us to hide." Part 4. The Thing. Aster 7 had actually been hiding from it. Took the science team 6 days to piece together what Vect's people, who called themselves, in the closest approximation the translator could manage, the Ashwalkers, had actually survived. Not a war with monsters. Not a natural catastrophe. A raid, decades ago, by Earth reckoning. A slaver expedition, non-human, technologically capable of atmospheric entry and orbital bombardment, that had strip-mined the Ashwalker settlements for forced labor, and then, when resistance became inconvenient, burned every settlement they could locate from orbit as a lesson. The reason Earth survey drones had found no intelligent life wasn't that there wasn't any. It was that an entire species had, in the space of one brutal generation, restructured their entire civilization around the principle of not being seen from the sky ever again. No cities, because cities could be mapped. No fires visible from orbit, because fires had been how the slavers found the last 3 villages. No radio, no infrastructure, no grid patterns. Every single marker Earth's protocols used to define civilization had been deliberately, painfully unlearned by a people who understood, in their bones, that being findable was how you died. Elena sat with that fact for a long time after the translator delivered it, because she recognized, with a cold and specific horror, that her own 4-word report confirmed no intelligent life had been produced by exactly the detection criteria the Ashwalkers had spent a generation learning to defeat. Her survey hadn't failed to find them by accident. It had failed because the Ashwalkers were good at not being found. And the reason they were that good was that the last people who'd found them had been monsters. They didn't hide from an empty universe. She told the council that night, her voice steadier than she felt. They hid from us. From what we look like from orbit. We terrified them before we ever landed, just by matching the profile of the thing that already hurt them once. Part 5. What humans do with that. This was the part of the story that mattered. Not the reveal, but the choice after it. And it was here that Outpost Meridian, whatever its earlier failures of imagination, did something that would end up meaning far more to the Ashwalkers than any amount of apology. They didn't send a warship. They didn't have one. And even if they had, Elena made it the first point of council policy that they never would. Not for this. What they sent over the following weeks was slower and stranger, and to the Ashwalkers, who had every reason on this world or any other to expect otherwise, completely disarming. They sent Dr. Osi back with medical supplies and nothing else, and he sat outside the ravine village for 2 full days before anyone would approach him. And on the 3rd day, a child with a fever her own healers couldn't break was brought to him by parents who were visibly ready to run at the first wrong move. And he treated her and asked for nothing and left before dark exactly as he'd promised. They sent Marcus Webb, not with weapons, but with fence-building tools, because Vecht had mentioned, almost in passing, that the Ashwalkers' greatest fear now was not humans specifically, but the native predators that had multiplied since the slavers' bombing runs had thinned out the larger grazing species that once kept them in check. Marcus, who had spent 8 months building a fence to keep his own daughter safe from a threat that turned out to be a frightened teenager with a botany notebook, spent the next month building fences to keep 200 people safe from a threat that was real. And they sent Sarah over her father's initial furious objection. And only after Elena pointed out that Sarah was the only human on the entire planet the Ashwalkers had seen run away, rather than raise a weapon, the first time contact was made. To the Ashwalkers, that single, unremarkable teenage instinct, fear answered with fear, not force, had apparently meant more than any diplomatic gesture the adults could have staged. Sarah brought her sketchbook. She sat outside the ravine village and drew the hand-leaf trees, the way she always had, and let the children come to her in their own time, at their own pace, the way frightened things always eventually do when the thing they're frightened of simply keeps showing up, unarmed, asking for nothing, leaving when it says it will. It took 4 months before Vecht used the word, through the translator, that Elena had privately hoped for and not quite dared to expect: neighbors. Epilogue. The report that wasn't 4 words. A year after first contact, Elena Vasquez filed a new report to Sol Command. It was not 4 words long. It ran to 11 pages, and the summary line at the top read, Aster 7 supports an indigenous sentient civilization, the Ashwalkers, previously subjected to hostile extraterrestrial contact, resulting in cultural trauma and deliberate technological self-limitation. Recommend. No further colonial expansion without joint Ashwalker Council approval. Recommend. Permanent revision of survey protocol. Absence of detectable civilization markers is not equivalent to absence of civilization. Recommend, most urgently, full defensive alliance between Outpost Meridian and Ashwalker settlements against the possibility of the original raiders' return. She'd learned, in the space of 1 terrifying year, that the 4 words she'd written before ever setting foot on this world had almost cost 40,000 humans and 200 survivors of a genocide the chance to become the only thing either side had left in an unfamiliar universe. Each other's people, because that, in the end, was the discovery that mattered more than any drone scan ever could have made. Not that the forest had been empty, that it had been full of a people who had learned at unbearable cost exactly how to disappear. And that when humans finally found them anyway, the humans chose, this time, not to be the thing they were hiding from.